Good morning, Andrew. How are you doing today?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you, Shiva, for inviting me on your podcast, your show. Happy to be here and talk to you.
Lovely, jubbly. Okay, so Andrew. So I first met Andrew in probably 2020 or 2021. I think it was just before COVID. I don't remember. Anyway, so it was at CUTM, so the College of Unitive and Alternative Medicine, and you were doing a session with us on behavioral iridology, and that's how I first got to uh I was first introduced to Andrew and his work, and since then I realized that Andrew is quite a preserver of knowledge.
Okay.
And he has quite extensive research in quite a few different fields, which is very useful. And yeah, so I think you've got the four major fields. So you've got the iridology, primarily behavioral iridology, and then you have the Indian palmistry, Indian astrology, and you've got Rasa Shastra.
That's close enough. It's good. I got it.
I'll use. Uh,
You can always just shorten it to rasa. Most people just say rasa because rasa just
oh yeah,
means rejuvenative. So if you say just right, you don't have to worry with it. The shastra is just the knowledge, but
yes,
rasa would be fine.
Rasa. Okay, we'll go with that. So, these are very interesting fields. So, I would fa like to first hand it over to you. Maybe you could go through each and what are the main distinctions of each? Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll do my
Yeah.
best. I mean, they're all huge topics, so I don't know whether I
Exactly.
could
I
do
know.
any of them justice in 5 or 10 minutes. But let's just go back to the. I got interested in alternative medicine probably, I'd say late 90s. I had a motorcycle accident and I was trying to recover and go through the usual stuff. It wasn't like horrific, but it was enough to be annoying, and it wasn't getting better. And I tried all the regular stuff and it just wasn't having much effect. And I was moaning at a friend at work. I had a work colleague who frequently traveled to India, and I was moaning at him about this. I wasn't getting any better, and he was sort of all sympathetic, but that was it. He came back from India and he threw a book at me and he said, "I thought you might be interested in this." It was a book on a basic introduction to Ayurveda, and I kind of thought, oh, what's this nonsense? It was all kind of just looked like mumbo jumbo, just a complete crazy for a Western mindset. It just looked mad. So I thought, okay, so I took it home and I put it on the side, didn't really think about it. And gradually over the next couple of weeks, I sort of picked it up and dipped into it. And it was just glancing through the pages, something kind of, you get that feeling inside that there's something there, but you don't know what it is. And it just drew me into that concept, that whole Ayurvedic concept of how to, and it's a complete concept. It's like structurally, energetically, it talks about lots of different things, but basically how the body stays healthy and how to rectify imbalances. So a very different concept to the Western, our kind of mechanized medicine that we all use now, don't we? We think of the bodies like machines, and we just change parts and we put oil in it and all that sort of stuff. It's not really like that. There's this the Eastern systems focus much more on an animating force, something that animates the body, and that's missing from the Western. We had it originally, but we lost it. We ditched all that sort of in the 1800s or whatever. But after we gave up our humoral medicine, we were using the four humors like you're using in Unani still, but we gave all those up. So I read this book and I thought, okay, this is really interesting. Perhaps I'll spend a little bit more time on it. I made some inquiries and I was looking for a college that would teach, and I found one quite local to me. And I did it was only took a couple of hours away. It was a guy in Somerset who was doing an introductory course to Ayurveda, so I did that. And I think at that point I realised I was sort of hooked, but I wasn't dedicated or focused on it enough to just do that. I was trying other things. So I was also looking at iridology at that time, pardon the pun. But I was looking at, I was interested in looking at the iris, and that was another avenue. So that's why it's kind of one of the things that's never left me. I'm still interested in eyes, and I'll explain in a bit why they're still useful. What were the other things you mentioned? The Rasa Shastra. So the Rasa Shastra is an outgrowth, a part of the Ayurvedic system. It is its own system. Technically it's its own system, but it integrated or amalgamated with Ayurveda maybe 50 1500 years ago, maybe more. I'm not quite sure when the two were fully integrated. If you read very old Ayurvedic texts, they'll mention the use of these alchemical medicines, but it's not a coherent system. It's more like the 10th, 12th century they begin to come together, and you really get a sense that Ayurveda has integrated these alchemical medicines. Um,
Oh, thought they were of the same sort of
yeah, it's
practice.
I mean, okay, so let's do a very brief background how we think that they came together. If you read very old manuscripts in Ayurveda, talk about, they have the Ayurvedic system, the humas, they call them doshas, but the same idea. You have the Vata, Pitta, Kapha, fire, water, and air. How do these things interact and produce health? But also in those same books, they talk a little bit about, they talk a lot about the herbs that they would use, the mantras, spells, if you like, bodily signs, all these things that were part of their world that would influence the health. But also there's some mention of minerals, metals, and gemstones, but the gems more in that you would wear them. So by wearing gemstones, you would
Right,
increase your
okay.
health. That was it, not so much taking them. They mention things like sulfur, there's shilajit, there's all these kind of minerals that were available, and they're used to a lesser extent. You see them in formulas, but there's no great explanation about how they're used. It will just say Gandhaka will be used, in this particular form,
Mm.
or Shilajit will be used. In fact, the very old classics spend a lot of time talking about Shilajit, this exudate, this black. I think it's mumio, isn't it? I'm not sure the Ayurvedic name. Sorry, the Unani term for it, but it's basically this bitumen, a resin that comes out of the rocks, and then it's
Mm.
boiled or treated in various ways to make it ingestible. And that was a very important mineral that was used because in the old Ayurvedic classics, they dedicate a huge section of one book. They have like 5 or 6 books in the compendium, and for one book, I think it's book 3, focuses a lot on rasayanas, rejuvenatives, things that make us younger. And this shilajit appears in there. That's an important mineral in there. So they're there, but they don't really go into any great detail about how they're used. What are the applications? What are the purification processes? And then around the 10th century, there's a lot of alchemical texts that come to the fore, and these are just books that are just about preparing these minerals, metals, and now preparing gemstones as medicines. And these are like manuals, if you like, on how to use and how to prepare and how to integrate these into other medicines. And then eventually, the later books, once you start getting to the 14th century, they're essentially Ayurvedic texts with sections to do with alchemy inside of
Mm.
them. And then you've got like the later books, 16th century Bhava Prakasha, where it's plainly an Ayurvedic text, but it's got a hell of a lot of information in there about how to prepare minerals, metals, and gemstones. So it fell under the Ayurvedic umbrella and has become more integrated as time's gone on. And now the two are kind of inseparable. If you go to any Ayurvedic
Mm.
pharmacy, they'll be, of course, preparing the herbs, but then you'll see them making these other rasas, these rejuvenatives. So the word rasa, we should explain. Rasa is youthfulness, essence, flow, energy,
Mm.
excitement, all these things are like
Wow.
rasa. They're all the things we associate with like youthful, how kids run around and scream and make lots of noise and they've always got loads of energy. That's kind of rasa. It's like juicy, sort of flowing, happy, there's like essence. And
Yeah.
as we get older, we get drier. It becomes more wind, more air. We dry out and we lose all that. So the idea with Rasa Shastra is to regain that kind of youthfulness. Now, there are parts of the system in the alchemical system which are more dedicated to what they call Dhatu Veda. These are the sort of purely alchemical endeavors. So this would be about changing the nature of metals, changing one metal into another metal, transmutation. Much
Mm.
more what we think about when we think about alchemy. If I said to you now, tell me what an alchemist is, you'll probably think of a guy, mixing stuff, trying to make gold out of lead, and that really is there, but it's a more dedicated path towards a different end. Those are more about perfecting the body, and so it's beyond health. It's actually making the body like gold, making the body
Mm.
imperishable. So gold never changes, it never tarnishes. You can throw it in the ocean for 1,000 years and take it out and it still looks the same. So that's what they were trying to do. So there were two branches of alchemy. One was trying to return health to sick
Mm,
people, and the other one was kind of wanting to live forever,
mm,
or transmuting gold and becoming wealthy or whatever. So those two things are there, and they still practiced as individual disciplines. But what we think about as Rasa Shastra now is much more the health or the medical application. Just curing
mm.
disease with more potent types of medicine. That's a
Yeah,
very brief. I mean, you could just talk about this for an hour. I mean, it's quite
yeah.
complex, but that's the generalities of the system. Now, the other things you spoke about, the reason I got interested in or I still do the behavioral iridology, was that
Mm,
I was doing that at the same time I was learning Ayurveda. So, iridology is a system where you look at the iris, you're looking at the color of the iris, the fibers, the structure, the colored part of the eye. And from that, we can make kind of diagnostic. I don't even say diagnostic, it's kind of more constitutional. It's like a constitutional typing. So you can see what things you might be more prone to, and how to work with your constitution and make it stronger. And
mm.
that's never left. I've always enjoyed looking at irises. They're just fun to look at because they are all completely individual. And it's a great way to get an inroad into understanding the person you're talking about. Just looking at how the eye is, if the eye is kind of closed all the time, or whether the eye is very open, whether the whites of the eye are very white, or they're kind of red or yellow. Those tell you so much about the constitution, and you begin to get an insight into the individual. So it's a great diagnostic technique. So you can see that although it's nothing to do with Ayurveda or maybe these Asian or Eastern systems of medicine, it's still very useful. And if you look at those systems like Chinese, Ayurveda, Unani, there are sections in there where they talk about the eye. They say, have a look at the person's eye, see what's going on. They mention a little bit about color. It's not an iridology level of examination, but it's basic interpretations of the eye.
Yeah,
How does
yeah,
the eye look? And that will
yeah,
give you an indication. So that's why I carried on with that. That's a very long story in itself. Iridology has many different schools, many different ways of using it. I got interested in the school that was looking more at the personality and how the personality and the constitution interacted. So it's a
yeah,
much more specific type of iridology, but it's a lot more fun, I think, than regular iridology, because you can really understand, why we subconsciously do things. Why are some people very analytically based? Why are they very knowledge driven? Why are some people much more emotionally reactively driven? And these things
yeah,
can be very clearly seen in the iris. So
yeah.
so I guess that's kind of like, without going into any depth, because I'm sure you've got other questions you want to ask, but without going too much into depth, that's why I still use the iridology, and that's why I still teach it. And I even try to integrate it a little bit into Ayurveda. I talk about the doshas,
Mm,
much like, I think we have to mention Shahid here, Shahid Bukhari. So he's running the Unani school. So he's really into that as well. He's using the four humours and the iris as well. So he's really integrated it into the system, which is
mm.
fantastic. He's done a lot more work with it than I have in terms of integrating it into one of those traditional systems. So that, hats off to him. He's done a great job there.
Yeah.
Um, and
Before we move on to the Indian palmistry and the astrology, just a few questions about the rasa. So you mentioned like, the working with like the metals and minerals. So is there, and it's quite uh deep in like the Indian history. Is there any reference to this that you've come across throughout the years of it being also present in British history? Um,
you mean, is there a Western tradition that's similar?
yeah, yeah,
Absolutely. I mean, it gets very contentious because you're trying to sort of say where's it all come from. So you could say
yeah.
Western alchemy has come very much through kind of Greek and Egyptian influences. And if you look at those very old, I think there's the Stockholm Papyrus, which is, I don't know, second, third century AD. And they've got a lot of things in there that they tell you how to make artificial gemstones. They tell you how to mix different alloys. There was a story about a great fire in Greece where they had all their exhibits. You had like their own museum in Greece, and in after the fire had been put out, all the metal artifacts had melted together where they were in a case or something, and they formed a new amalgam. So they called it, I think it was called Corinthian bronze or something. So they even understood about how metals could fuse and form these different alloys. So there is a Western tradition. It's slightly different from the Indian tradition. Well, it's quite a bit different, but the concept is the same. They too have their medicinal types of medicine, and they also have their more purely alchemical, where they're just trying to
Mm.
transmute base metals
Yeah.
into gold. So it's very similar, and it's there. But the thing that they don't have in the Western tradition is they've lost all that because they've disregarded the humours and the that kind of constitutional based medicine.
Mm.
It doesn't link to anything anymore. Whereas
Right.
we can
Okay.
look at a
Yeah.
metal and say it's heating, it's cooling, and we know what it would do on a type of dosha or
Mm.
one of the humours. That's all gone in the West. It's one size fits all. This medicine is a rejuvenative and it's good for everybody. But that may not be the case because it could be very heating, and if you're a fiery type, it could aggravate. So they've
Yeah.
lost that. That's what they've lost. Yeah.
Yeah. Like the practical application and how to practically apply it to different people and different conditions. That's what's seems to be lost. Um, yeah. And I know homeopaths use metals uh like gold and silver in their healing work. Well, what would you say would be the major differences and maybe even similarities?
Well, they both use gold to start with, but what the end
Yeah.
remedy is completely different. So they're using dilution. So they're treating gold to get it to a certain state, and then it'll be put into a base, and then that base medium will be shaken. So they call it succussing. So
Yeah.
and then they
Yeah.
take a drop of that and put it into another medium, and it by dilution it gets stronger. I mean, homeopathy is so mad. I don't mean mad as it's like it's not worth doing. I just mean the concept behind it makes no sense because we always think that the stronger the essence is, the more potent it is. But theirs is the opposite. As you dilute it, you're taking it back to its core. It's like its very basic principles, and you're making it stronger by diluting it. It's a completely different system of
And
medicine.
yeah, it works as well.
It works. I mean, I've used. The problem is with it. I mean, this is only my own personal experience. So homeopaths out there probably would disagree with me, but the key thing with homeopathy is you really need to get the right remedy for the right person. So constitution becomes everything. You really have to find a remedy that attunes with your. That's why when you read the indications, they're very specific. You're
Mm.
looking for somebody that's. I'll give you one quite funny example. A family a family sort of relative, distant relative. He was interested in homeopathy, so I used to spend a bit of time with him because I was interested that he was interested. He was treating a girl for she had a terrible what we would call attention deficit disorder. Now they just couldn't concentrate, terrible handwriting, very poor learning skills, and he was asked to treat her homeopathically, and he did. And he uh, he just got a sense about what was wrong with her, what her real problem was, and he said this remedy just flashed into his head, and it was tarantula, so the spider. So the
Yeah.
tarantula was her. He said she's definitely a tarantula. That would be her remedy. So he mixed it up, and he said within like a week, completely different kid. Suddenly the writing calmed down. Something about the indications for tarantula match this child's profile, and because he
Yeah.
had a really big or broad understanding of these remedies, he just knew that was going to be, or he had a good insight that would be the remedy that she needed, and it worked.
Wow.
So that's a very intuitive sort of homeopath at work, but not all of them can do that, and a lot of them use computer programs now. So you'll put in all the you put in all the
Right.
indications,
Yeah.
and it will search through the hundreds of thousands of millions of remedies probably by now, and try and narrow it down and find something that matches. Because you've got to look at
Wow.
all those indications. Look, I'm not an expert on homeopathy, and I probably everything I've said just maybe disregard it, but that's my experience of it.
Yeah. Well, no, I've got a similar experience as well. So a relative of mine, he actually had an umbilical hernia and it was causing him severe pain and he didn't want to go for a surgery. And so he went to a homeopath in Rhode Island and I think the consultation was probably around 2 hours just to get a real, you know, understanding of the person. And they discussed everything. And he gave him a arum, I think you call it gold extract.
Okay.
And the hernia went within a week.
Oh my God, wow. Yeah.
Amazing, yeah.
Well, so it would still have gold in it. They would have started with gold, but then gold would
Yeah,
have been probably reduced to some kind of an oxide or an ash, and then they would dilute it from there. Or
yeah,
maybe the gold was just soaked in a solution, and then they took drops of that solution, and then it's the succussing that's the important bit that kind of
yeah,
energizes it. So
yeah,
they can do, you can have 30 times dilution, 100 times 200,
yeah,
400,000, it just goes on, and they get more and more, they get stronger as they get more, as they get diluted, as I
yeah.
understand it.
Um, so that brings me to a question. So what do these minerals and these metals, what do they have in them that sort of we can't really find from the plant?
I'll
Yeah.
try and answer. I mean, that is a $64,000 question. If we really knew what was doing that, I guess the idea is that if you think about it, man here or us here and the minerals or metals, they're the furthest away from us, aren't they? So we can easily assimilate things like plant products, animal products, because they're part of our natural diet anyway. We're consuming those so we have an ability to digest. But once you move into these minerals, maybe not so bad at some stages, like clays or something, because they might be in our diet in some degree. But once you're into metals, they get much more difficult for the body to assimilate. So the idea Ayurvedically is that because of their concentration, and their the opposition to us, they're very powerful, but they have the inherent quality much stronger. So they have like iron would have a real blood affinity. It's like a real blood builder. But we need iron, a certain amount of iron in our body. I think if you take all the iron out of the body, it will make a like a 6-inch nail or something. So you've got iron in you, but to get iron into a form that we can digest takes a lot of destructuring. We have to destructure that iron and then turn it back into something that we can assimilate, and that's the process of alchemy, is converting it from a metal which is indigestible into something the body can digest. But the idea is that there are a lot of toxins, there are a lot of things in there that we don't need that would be damaging for us. So the process is to extract the good part and keep the strength, but remove all the toxicity that would cause us imbalances. So there's a lot of that, like iron. Iron it's iron, isn't it? It's the element iron, so it's concentrated, but we can't take that concentrated form as iron to digest in a human body. But once we've extracted it and taken it back to a form we can digest, it's very, very potent. So the thing is, these medicines tend to be very potent. You don't need a lot of them. You don't take them for very long, and they're highly concentrated. So we generally rasa medicines you don't take for more than 2 weeks, 2 weeks maximum. Sometimes much less than that. You don't need a lot of it. Like if you've got a zinc deficiency, you might have to consume a lot of shellfish to get the same amount as if you just took Ayurvedic zinc, which is
Mm,
concentrated, and you'd only take a tiny bit of it. In fact, if you take too much zinc, even in like micrograms of zinc, you can start to feel nauseous because it's that strong, it's that concentrated. So yeah, I think that's the secret of that medicine system, is that these things are highly potent. Ruby is particularly good. It's another good blood tonic. It's very good for the heart. It's very good for the eyes. There's all kinds of things that it's particularly good for, but it's getting it from that form into a form that we can take. That's the art of the system, is being able to take something that's indigestible and convert it into something that we can assimilate and use. And they are very potent because they're so concentrated. But there is a lot of toxicity that needs to be removed, and that's what that Rasa Shastra is about. It's really removing that toxicity. It's the knowledge of how to cleanse that material and make it bioavailable.
right.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And so if like medical doctors were more familiar with Rasa, then prescribing things like iron pills for anemia, they probably wouldn't do that. And they probably find a Rasa remedy, and that would be a lot more beneficial and help a lot more people as well. So
Well, they're
yeah,
doing that now. If you, a lot of people get iron sulfate as a remedy. It's quite a common remedy. Your doctor will prescribe it even now. But the iron sulfate is a chemically produced iron sulfate. There's no purification in it at all.
yeah, that
They're just using it. But we'll give chemically, if you analyze the bashma that we produced and the medical one that they're giving you, if you looked at them in terms of like just analysis, structurally they'll be the same. There'll be a type of iron sulfite, but the chemical one hasn't undergone any purification. So you'll get all the side effects that come with that. Remember, it's one
wow,
size fits all, doesn't it?
yeah,
Mechanistic medicine is this is good for everybody. It doesn't matter who I give
yeah,
it to, it's going to cure them. And we
yeah,
know that's not true. Where Ayurvedically we might say this person needs iron, but because of the inherent qualities of iron and because of their type, their dosha, or
mm,
their humor, that's going to imbalance them. So what we'll do is we'll mix it with a herb that either warms it up a little bit
mm,
or makes it more
right,
digestible, because they may not have the ability to digest it, and yet we know
yeah,
they really need it, but we'll augment it with something. But the Western one won't
yeah,
do that. It'll just say take a teaspoonful of this once a day, and
yeah.
all will be well.
Can you give an example of how you would give iron to the three different doshas? Is there a way of giving iron to the different doshas?
Yeah,
For
well,
ex
you don't. It's not one of those things. You don't just sort of get iron, prepare it, make it into a powder, then just give it. It would be part of a formula. We would then
yeah,
formulate. So we would look to see whether they were what. Firstly, what was the symptoms? What was the problem? But just because they may be presenting a problem that's not classically associated with their type. They may be like an air type, but they would have like fiery problems. It could be,
mm,
they're overheating or they're underheating.
yeah,
So we would look and see, we would have to try and weigh up a lot of things. It's not as simple as just if it's this type, you do this. If it's this type,
yeah,
it has to be specific. So you'd have to look at it in terms of how they were, what symptoms were they exhibiting, what overall dosha were they, and what's their ability to digest it, and do they need help with that? So,
mm,
iron's it's got an astringency, so you might give it with like licorice or something. So
mm,
it makes it more slippery, so it's not burning or it's not sticking or it's not too astringent. You want it to be able to travel,
yeah,
and you'd have to see what the circulation was like. It would require a lot of variables, but basically
mm,
you would look at the properties of it and you would say, okay, it could have like is it going to have an overall cooling effect? So do we need
mm,
to warm it in this person? It has an inherent coolness anyway, but would
mm,
we want to warm that up? And how is this person going to be digesting it? And then there are different types of iron as well. We have different, there are different. We can get iron from you can get iron from rust. You can
mm,
process rust. 100-year-old iron that has rusted, so you get the rust that comes off of it, or from the source. Or there's naturally occurring iron sulfides that we can find, we can use. There's iron oxides, which they call it bog iron. It's that very red. That's tends to be used more for external applications. It's a good you mix it with clay and apply it to the skin, and it's very good at cleansing the skin because it's astringent and it feeds the
mm,
blood. It's a nutritive. But there are probably, the magnetic iron ore, even steel. There's there are forms of steel that they were using. There's many different types of iron remedy, and then you would
yeah.
look to see which would be the most appropriate.